At 9 years old, Harper accidentally dropped a pecan pie on the living room rug during a crowded Thanksgiving dinner. Instead of comforting his panicked daughter, her father, Richard, mocked her publicly. "She's always like this," he scoffed, "clumsy and never takes responsibility." As the room erupted in laughter, a deep emotional scar formed. Harper internalized the belief that her parents saw her as a chronic liar and a failure. For the next 21 years, Harper shrank into herself. She tiptoed through life, constantly apologizing even when innocent. Desperate for approval, she molded herself into the perfect, compliant daughter, completely losing her own voice in the process. 4 years ago, at a bustling charity fundraiser in downtown Chicago, everything changed. Harper crossed paths with Liam Hayes, a 33-year-old architect with a deeply grounding presence. They hadn't been talking for even 5 minutes when Liam accidentally spilled a glass of champagne all over her beautiful silk dress. In the past, a moment like this would have sent Harper into a spiral of panic and frantic apologies, reflexively taking the blame for someone else's mistake, but the atmosphere shifted entirely because of Liam's reaction. Frantically grabbing a handful of cocktail napkins, his face flushed bright red as he stammered, "Oh my God, I am so incredibly sorry. Please feel free to yell at me. I absolutely deserve to get kicked out of here for being this clumsy." Instead of shrinking into herself, Harper felt a genuine smile break through. She laughed out loud and replied, "Well, if you're going to make up for ruining this dress, you at least owe me a really good joke to compensate." That shared laugh sparked a connection that lasted throughout the evening. They stayed at the venue's bar talking for hours, and for the first time in her life, Harper felt a profound sense of relief. It was as if she could finally take off the heavy mask of the perfect daughter she had worn for decades. With Liam, she didn't have to make herself smaller or carefully curate her words. He listened patiently, engaged with her thoughts, and deeply respected her honesty. Beside him, she was finally safe to just be herself. After 18 months of dating, their relationship blossomed into something deeply rooted in mutual understanding and unwavering respect. When Liam finally decided to propose, he didn't rely on grand gestures, extravagant flash mobs, or a wildly expensive restaurant. Instead, he chose a quiet Tuesday evening on the balcony of their Seattle apartment, with a gentle, misty rain falling around. He knelt down on the damp floorboards and pulled out a vintage diamond ring, a precious heirloom passed down from his late grandmother. As he looked up at Harper, his voice trembled with raw emotion while speaking her name. In that vulnerable, beautiful moment, Harper felt an overwhelming wave of happiness. For her entire life, she had fought desperately just to be noticed by her family, but right here, she was finally being truly, wholeheartedly chosen. She didn't even let him finish the sentence before she dropped to her knees, throwing her arms around him and tearfully whispering her yes. Their engagement marked the beginning of a joyful new chapter, free from the anxieties of her past. They eagerly began planning an intimate, cozy wedding set for mid-October, focusing only on the people. For the rehearsal dinner, they booked a private, elegant space at the Oak Room, a classic Chicago restaurant known for its warm ambiance. Everything felt perfect, peaceful, and entirely theirs. She was completely unaware of the dark clouds slowly gathering just beyond the horizon of her newfound joy. From the very beginning, Harper's parents, Richard and Eleanor Bennett, made no effort to welcome Liam into their family. According to Richard's hypercritical, transactional view of the world, Liam was far too soft-spoken and severely lacked the cutthroat corporate ambition necessary to meet the Bennett. Eleanor's tactics, however, were far more insidious. To Liam's face, she maintained a flawless, camera-ready smile, playing the role of the gracious future mother-in-law. But the second he stepped out of the room, she would lean in and whisper. She learned to tune out their constant, biting criticisms and purposefully reduced the amount of personal information she shared with them about her life and her wedding plans. However, this newfound independence did not sit well with her parents. Her refusal to seek their approval and her success in building a life outside their suffocating grip deeply infuriated them. Richard and Eleanor were terrified of losing their lifelong control over their daughter. Realizing that their usual tactics of subtle shaming were no longer working, they began to quietly hatch a devastating plan to dismantle her happiness. They simply could not bear the thought of Harper living a joyful, liberated life that didn't revolve around their strict expectations. Their silent resentment festered into something truly malicious. It set the stage for a calculated betrayal. Just 10 days before Harper was set to walk down the aisle, her parents executed their malicious plan. Without any prior warning, Richard and Eleanor showed up unannounced at Liam's architectural firm. Sitting across from him in his office, they spun an atrocious, calculated lie designed to destroy his trust. They looked the man their daughter loved in the eye and told him that when Harper was 23, she had secretly given birth to a baby boy and ruthlessly abandoned the child at a local orphanage to avoid taking any responsibility. Richard deliberately used incredibly degrading and humiliating language to attack his own daughter's character, painting her as a monster. Meanwhile, Eleanor played the part of the heartbroken, tragic mother to absolute perfection, placing a dramatic hand on her chest as she warned him, "Please, Liam, we are only telling you this to protect you. Don't let her trap you into a marriage built on deceit." Their ultimate goal was to plant a toxic seed of doubt so deep that Liam would immediately call off the wedding. Late that afternoon, Liam called Harper. When she answered, he wasn't screaming or angry. Instead, his voice was exceptionally careful and fragile, as if he were holding a delicate piece of glass that might shatter at any moment. He didn't aggressively accuse her or immediately demand answers. Instead, he gently explained that her parents had visited his office and softly asked if there was something from her past she needed to share. In that chilling moment, the ground completely fell out from beneath Harper's feet, leaving her gasping. Hearing her parents' vile accusations repeated through Liam's phone call, Harper completely broke down. Sitting alone in her parked car, she clutched the steering wheel as a profound, suffocating agony ripped through her chest. Her parents hadn't just told a lie, they had weaponized the most devastating trauma of her entire life. The heartbreaking reality was that when Harper was 23, she had unexpectedly gotten pregnant while trapped in a highly toxic, emotionally abusive relationship with her ex-boyfriend, Tristan Vance. When she discovered the pregnancy, Tristan was relentlessly cruel. He coldly denied any responsibility and subjected her to intense psychological manipulation, leaving a young Harper feeling utterly terrified, isolated, and entirely alone. The true tragedy struck at 19 weeks when she suffered a sudden, completely devastating miscarriage. It was an agonizing, traumatic loss that she had buried deep within her soul, mourning the grief in total silence for the past 7 years. The most sickening part of her parents' deception was that Eleanor had been the one to drive Harper to the emergency room that horrible night. Her mother had held her hand in the hospital waiting room. Eleanor knew with absolute, indisputable certainty that there was no living child, no orphanage, and no abandonment. Yet, they had chosen to take her deepest, most realizing the sheer magnitude of their cruelty. Harper felt as though her heart had been physically crushed. The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly unnatural, that it permanently shattered any remaining illusion of that very evening. Still trembling, Harper drove straight to Liam's apartment. Sitting across from him, she summoned every ounce of courage she possessed and poured out the entire agonizing. She told him about Tristan's emotional abuse, the terrifying pregnancy, the devastating miscarriage, and the heavy burden of silent grief she had carried for 7 long years. Throughout her confession, Liam sat perfectly still on the couch. His eyes were filled with overwhelming empathy, and he didn't interrupt her or show a single ounce of judgment. When her voice finally broke and she stared at the floor, waiting for the inevitable questions, Liam simply leaned forward and wrapped both of his hands tightly around hers. His voice was thick with emotion as he said, "Harper, I am so incredibly sorry you had to go through something that horrific all by yourself." She looked up, her vision blurred with tears, and choked out, "You're not angry that I kept this hidden?" "I believe you, Harper. I believe you completely." His unconditional love and steady support offered a profound sense of healing. acting as an anchor in the midst of a terrifying. Yet, even wrapped in his comforting embrace, Harper knew that the dark, poisonous cloud of doubt her parents had deliberately manufactured was still hovering dangerously. The rehearsal dinner was held in the private dining space of the Oak Room, beautifully transformed into an intimate, romantic haven. Amber candlelight flickered against the exposed brick walls, illuminating long tables draped in cream-colored linens, and Harper arrived wearing a stunning navy silk dress, doing her absolute best to maintain a radiant smile, though an undeniable tension crackled silently in the air. At the far end of the elegant table sat her parents. Harper desperately hoped the evening would simply pass without any further drama. But at exactly 8:17 p.m., the heavy wooden doors of the dining room swung open and the entire atmosphere shifted. Maya Lynn, Harper's fiercely loyal best friend from her darkest days at 23, unexpectedly walked into the room. Maya's face was set in stone, carrying the exhausted but determined look of someone who had just driven straight from New York to Chicago without stopping. Under her arm, she tightly gripped a thick manila envelope. Harper was absolutely stunned. The two had quietly drifted apart over the years as they mutually tried to leave the pain. Bypassing the confused whispers and polite greetings of the other guests, Maya marched directly toward the head of the table. Without offering a single pleasantry, she grabbed Harper by the arm, firmly pulled her out into the quiet, deserted hallway, and pressed the heavy envelope into her trembling hands, insisting that she open it right that very second. Standing in the dimly lit corridor, Harper opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside lay her complete, undeniably authentic medical records from the hospital. The official discharge summaries and a formal letter from the attending physician clearly and clinically documented the tragic loss of her pregnancy at exactly 19 weeks. But what lay beneath those hospital documents was even more shocking. Maya had brought printed screenshots of text messages, time-stamped just 3 months ago, exchanged directly between Harper's mother, Eleanor, and her abusive ex-boyfriend, Tristan Vance. The messages clearly exposed Eleanor actively trying to coerce Tristan into backing up her vicious lie. She had aggressively pressured him to falsely confirm that Harper had delivered a living baby and cruelly abandoned it. However, Tristan, despite all his past terrible behavior, actually felt a pang of guilt. He had flatly refused to participate in Eleanor's twisted scheme, telling her he wanted absolutely no part in ruining Harper's life. Deeply unsettled by the mother's dark manipulation, Tristan had tracked down Maya and forwarded her the entire text exchange as proof. Holding the undeniable evidence in her hands, Harper didn't feel a sudden, explosive burst of rage. Instead, she experienced a chilling, profoundly quiet moment of absolute clarity. The heavy burden of doubt she had carried since childhood completely evaporated. She finally realized the absolute truth. Her parents had never acted out of misguided love or a desire to protect her. They were simply desperate to maintain a toxic, iron-fisted control over her life, willing to destroy her happiness at any cost. Equipped with the truth, she turned back toward. Stepping back into the dining room, Harper didn't stand alone. Liam immediately stepped to her side, interlocking his fingers with hers to form an unbreakable front. With a calm, unwavering voice, she placed the hospital records and printed text messages onto the center of the table. She exposed her parents' ruthless manipulation to everyone present, watching as Richard turned pale and Eleanor stared at the floor in humiliated silence. Without shedding a single tear, Harper firmly asked them to leave her rehearsal dinner and her life. As the heavy wooden doors closed behind them, Liam's mother, Margaret, stood up and began to applaud. Soon, the entire room joined in, permanently shattering the toxic liar label that had haunted Harper for decades. They got married that Saturday in a beautiful, deeply honest ceremony, completely free from the shadows of her past.